Thank you very much, and good afternoon, folks, and happy Bank Holiday Friday. Yay! You're very welcome to our Friday sessions, and today we are joined by the lovely Siobhan Finn, who is National Hub Network Manager at the Community Enterprise Association of Ireland. So I had to just write that down so I'd get it right. Lots of acronyms and stuff that I always get mixed up. Siobhan is a friend of Innovate Island, and we cross purposes on ISO committees and all sorts of other conversations and fun stuff. So, welcome, Siobhan. Today Siobhan's going to give us a run through of her QHubs program, and specifically how, and correct me if I'm wrong, Siobhan, this is a world first program for hubs and building standard an innovative standard around how they're run, what value they create, and what impact they can have. So that is in Siobhan's gift to tell us today about what they did, what they learned, what potholes they fell into, what potholes we can avoid as we're trying to learn and share our knowledge of implementing innovation and innovation programs in all sorts of contexts. So Siobhan, welcome, Catherine, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Hi, everybody. That's a lovely introduction, Catherine. Thank you very much. I have a presentation, a deck I'm going to share, and I'm quite happy to share it afterwards as a PDF as well. So I'm just going to pop that up, but just simply to say there's a lot of detail. So rather than talking through the detail on the slides, I'm simply just going to talk to the slides. And then maybe at the end, if any of you have questions or need to know a little bit more, and in fact, one of the, I guess, leading experts on this is Owen, who's here in the call. So Owen, if I don't manage to get it right, don't say anything for now. We can talk at 2 o'clock. Okay, so I'm just going to see if I can open this up.
Hopefully you do have permissions to share.
I should do, yes, I'm seeing something here. I think we're good. Okay, can you all see that?
Yep.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, super. Okay. So I guess effectively we as the Community Enterprise Association, we're funded through Enterprise Ireland under Red F3 to carry out a number of initiatives for the Community Enterprise Centre and Enterprise Hub network right around the country, of which it's estimated there are approximately 250 investments to the tune of, I believe, 255 million of funds that have come down through DETI and Enterprise Ireland over the years. Now, the background to this particular programme is that a national survey was carried out in 2019 before we even heard of COVID in this country, and the feedback from stakeholders, which included Enterprise Ireland, the departments, IDA, and a number of other key stakeholders, including the NSAI, was the difficulty in identifying the quality of performance coming out of the enterprise centres and hubs, everything from service delivery to the physical infrastructure available to the expertise in terms of innovation management and the kind of supports that were being provided to startups and scale-ups. So the ask in very simple terms at that time was to prepare a type of framework and growth pathway to improve the performance of these locations right around the country. So that's just going to give you a sense. We're all over the country. I can guarantee that every single one of you here in the call today has an enterprise centre or enterprise hub close by to you, though you may not know them as that. So the type of and variety of centres and hubs ranges from the likes of the Guinness Enterprise Centre, which is one of our members, across to Galway Technology Centre, down to the RDI Hub in Killorglin, over to Innovate Wexford in the southeast, and many, many more in between. Some as small as accommodating maybe only 2 to 3 businesses, private business, and then a number of entrepreneurs, and then possibly offering some community services into the wider community. For example, I was up in Ballinsloe during the week. There's an amazing enterprise centre there. They have about 180 jobs accommodated within the building, about 25, 26 businesses, but they also accommodate the National Ambulance Training Service, the National Ambulance Operations Services, a school for special needs pupils so as to prepare them for entry into primary school, and a number of entrepreneurs as well. So huge amount of activity going on right around the country. So you can understand the need to, I suppose, not quite standardise, but to be able to establish a picture of the performance of each centre and hub, very particularly for the likes of EI or IDA clients who need to know where is the best place to locate their either emerging startup if it's an EI investment or their incoming FDI investment on the IDA side. So our focus was very much around looking at two primary areas of performance, which is quality management and innovation management, but we actually grounded the entire program in 6 key principles, and Owen, maybe if you want to add a little bit more at the end around that. But we looked at what were the primary management activities within each centre and hub, and it came down to quality management, innovation management, environmental management, ICT, governance, and collaborative relationships. So while we were being very clear to our community and to our stakeholders that this was not about developing an ISO standard at the outset, we wanted to ground our thinking and our ambition for top class performance and thought leadership in the ISO families of standards. So we looked at each one of those standards, we identified key questions, and that formed the very, very basis, I suppose, of the development of the programme. Now, what was really interesting was at the outset of the programme, and as Catherine mentioned, the ambition for this programme is that it is a world first national programme for centre and hub performance. So we went right around the world virtually with the help of Owen, Eilish Scally and Sean McNulty to look at what best practice performance management could look like through other programs. And we came right back to Ireland and Origin Green at the end of it. And it's important to say, because Catherine, you mentioned potholes, I would safely say, and I'm sure Owen is nodding, that the team in Origin Green have saved us falling into so many potholes over the last 2 years, simply because they've been at this for nearly 12 years now, and they have learned so much through the delivery of their own delivery and development of their own Origin Green program. So they've been absolutely incredible. And as a program framework, it fits really, really well with what we want to achieve through QHubs. So that's just going to give you a sense of the key stakeholders involved, all the agencies and organisations around the country that have a vested interest in developing the hub and centre sector right across Ireland. From a government perspective, the locations around the country are termed the National Hub Network. That brand and the entity behind it, which is connectedhubs.ie, is really being positioned as best in class in terms of global performance of what a centre and hub should look like. So the QHubs programme will underpin that promise going forward, and it will allow Ireland to market itself very competitively globally, offering the best in remote working practices and hybrid working, the best kind of environments for startups and scale-ups, the engagement with SMEs at a local community level, and overall presenting a picture of what looks like a really tightly connected enterprise ecosystem at a local and regional level, which ultimately feeds into the national performance piece. So these are the programme and the pillars I mentioned. I'm not going to go into them. You're familiar with all of them. I'll make the slides available afterwards if anybody is interested, but very much reflective of what day-to-day performance of a centre and hub looks like. The programme itself begins with a diagnostic very similar to Origin Green. We have trialled and tested that diagnostic on a number of occasions in the last 6 months, and we presented the outputs of the user testing to Minister English and the National Steering Group back in October. And then at the request of the department, we began to look at a geographic rollout to understand how the data would look like from a geographic perspective. So providing that kind of, I suppose, really dense detail around the performance of enterprise centres and enterprise hubs in a particular area. And we chose the Midlands simply because the Regional Enterprise Plan Manager for the Midlands sits in our National Steering Group. So it was an easy ask in terms of rolling it out there. There are 14 centres across the Midlands that have full-time staff, and of the 14, 12 completed the diagnostic, which was a really, really good response for us, and very good response for obviously the Midlands themselves. And in terms of the data that's been collated, Eilish is working in the background to pull all of that together. But our anticipation, our expectation is that there's going to be a really, really strong data set that reflects particularly the Midlands. Now, one might say 12 responses in the context of a national geographic spread is quite small. It is. So out of this particular exercise, we will produce 2 reports: the Midlands report, looking at the geographic density and the data coming from there. And then we're going to take that cohort and wrap another probably 10 to 15 locations right around the country through that data set by requesting their completion of the diagnostic. And then we'll have a solid response rate from approximately probably 40 locations, which is heading into a good, strong percentage of the overall national hub network. So where we're at right now in February, the ambition is to plan to present the results of that data to the department in early March. And then from that, we begin a formal national rollout of the programme in Q2 of 2023. So that's just going to give you a sense of what the calendar looks like. Once we get the diagnostic rolled out in Q2, we will begin then onboarding the locations that have completed the diagnostic in Q3, supporting them through a growth plan, which includes mentoring and a number of other activities, and very bespoke and individualized mentoring based on the needs of the location and based on the data collected during the completion of the diagnostic. And then by Q1 2024, we expect to be in a position to produce the first benchmarking report for the National Hub Network, comparing geographic like for like, comparing size and structure like for like, comparing service offering like for like, and much, much more. So I suppose the question is, why would you do something like this? I'm going to skip through this one. This just gives a sense of the various steps within the process. So why would you take on a project like this? What's the benefit for the sector? And where is it going to make a difference at a regional and national level? This lists some of the key anticipated benefits, the majority of which there are, I suppose, grounded in improved economic performance, transforming economic performance across the regions, and developing that kind of really strong, robust regional ecosystem model right across the country, which feeds into the national ambition. Very importantly, we say across the country, we've 9 Enterprise Ireland regions. Not all perform basically at the same level. You might have one region that produces quite a number of HPSUs on an annual basis. You might have another region that doesn't see any HPSUs come out on an annual basis. So what this programme will do is it will lift the performance of the facilitators and service providers for HPSUs, for the economic development and the progression of micro and small business, and with a particular focus for the Indigenous industry base around management training, which feeds back into the OECD recommendations of 2019 it was. And of course, what this will also do is, from the departmental perspective and from our funders' perspective, it will provide very clear data around where the gaps exist. So where does future funding need to go? Does it go into infrastructure? Does it go into programmatic investment? Does it go into other types of support? So that is, again, back to what the 6 pillars look like. In the case of some hubs, some will be less applicable than others, but these are what we consider, I suppose, the key performance areas. And that is a snapshot. And believe it or not, that represents
2 years work.
Over 24 months of work at this stage.
Oh, well done, Siobhan, and thank you so
you.
much. Really interesting, really interesting. And I'm going to jump in first, and because when you started here or with this program, in looking around the country where there is a lot of hubs, what was your sort of initial findings? Was it that it was success factors were you know, individual and perhaps, you know, embedded in an individual? Or was there more kind of common themes that were success factors?
It was a mixture of both, Catherine, but if you jump back to when we actually started this program, spring of 2021, right in the midst of the third lockdown,
Yeah.
and the 18 months or 2 years before that had completely transformed this sector in Ireland,
Yeah.
because of the demand-driven service provision, remote working, hybrid working, etc. So there was a huge amount of noise in the sector, and I know Owen would have sat in quite a number of the focus groups at the very outset. The noise was deafening in terms of who does what, who funds what are the requirements, what can we expect going forward, how do we pivot our business model, how do we take an enterprise centre that has very traditionally been grounded in a business model of shared office space.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make that work going forward? How do we create the investment? How do we drive the knowledge of that? So this was there were huge challenges in the sector. And given that this sector, I suppose the very traditional community enterprise sector, the investment in that sector goes right back to the early 90s. So you had a lot of individuals who were very, I suppose, traditional in their approach to managing enterprise centres.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a massive mind shift required, and really quite frightening for them in terms of the expectations going forward. So did we have resistance to change? No, I don't think we did. We had an appetite for change and a commitment to be part of this, but a fear around what was required and the level of resource and investment at an individual centre or a hub level. The vast majority of these are all CLGs or DACs. They're under-resourced, underfunded, very time poor. So they saw this at the outset as being very, very challenging. Now, we were aware of this. I guess, you know, we were learning ourselves as we went along as to what worked, what didn't. But one thing we were really, really clear about, and this is a message that I was trying to communicate from the beginning, there is no one size that fits all, and every single location has a place on this program. And
Right.
Then the really important part became, you decide where you want that place to be. So you can onboard onto the program, be part of the growth journey, and stay where you are in terms of your current performance, just fine-tune the behaviours and the standards of services and processes coming out of your location or hub. Or you can see way, way down the tracks and realise there's so much more potential sitting within this centre. We've got half a dozen SMEs, probably 3 to 4 of those have the ability to scale. How do we help them scale? So it was really about, I suppose, waking up the thinking of the managers, the staff, and very particularly in some cases the boards, to recognise what was possible going forward.
Cool. And do they have a commercial model? Like they have to make a profit, or at least they're whatever, not for profit, but they have to be self-sustaining.
The ambition is that they're all self-sustaining, and they're not all self-sustaining, Catherine. This is, I suppose, a fault in the business model and maybe in the traditional approach to funding. And Owen has sat in meetings with me where we've heard the term used, the tap can't keep dripping. So for those centres and hubs that are not self-sustaining, they need to become self-sustaining, or at some point in the future they will be faced with a situation where they may not have any choice but to close their doors. Now, that's not what we want to see happening. That's not what the funders want to see happening. It's not what the departments want to see happening. So the way out of that is the growth programme under QHubs, understanding the opportunities and really maximising the potential of each and every one.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I could ask questions all day. Charlie?
Yeah, sorry, one thing first. That was really interesting. Would you mind stopping sharing your screen as well, so we can see everybody a little bit better? But that was really interesting. I'm probably one of the people on the call that doesn't have one just up the road, because I'm the other side of the border. So is there any plans or aspirations to make this an all-Ireland thing, or to roll out into Northern Ireland, get a partner association or something to do something similar?
We're well on the way to that, Charlie. We have good relationships with the National Enterprise Network, and very particularly with OMA Enterprise. We've worked with them on a European project which has just concluded. I don't know, are they 80 something? locations across the north. I think that's the figure I heard quoted in a meeting.
It's the number you used in my hearing, at least.
Yeah, that's close enough to the number of locations. I think there's been a few more own that have sprung up over the last year or so. Not all of them are members of the National Enterprise Network, but probably 95% of them are.
And this is probably a really naive question, but does this include the private commercial ventures that set up as enterprise hubs, collaborative networks, or spaces and so on? Yeah.
So we as an organisation, our focus is on the CLG Community Enterprise Centre and Hub. The National Hub Network, as termed by government and funded by government, is made up of our members, private entities, the broadband connection points, believe it or not, because the broadband connection points are being used in towns and villages to build out co-working spaces locally. So it's been, Connected Hubs will say there are about 400 locations identified around the country. How many of them are functioning as enterprise centres and co-working spaces? I would say probably in the region of max 250, and that would include the private entities.
Right, okay, thank you.
The figures move all the time, Charlie. Every time a press release comes out, the figure is different.
No, I can imagine. Thank you for that, Alan.
You had a question.
Yeah, just a curious one. It was a very interesting presentation. Loved hearing about that. I'm just curious in terms of the whole hybrid work thing that we've all been kind of navigating over the last sort of 2.5 years. Like, how do you kind of right size this from a capacity point of view? I mean, as I speak to you now, I'm sitting in one of the big WeWork things in Dublin. I've had experience of smaller hubs and breakout things and innovation centres around the place. And, you know, it does seem to be a feast or a famine, you know, so that people sometimes are stuck for spaces and can't get anywhere that they need to. And, you know, you get phone calls sort of saying, do you know anywhere we could go to? And in other situations, you know, under capacity, and probably some of them have difficulty making the commercial model work from a real estate point of view, from a bums on seats point of view. So, you know, I would just love to kind of get your thoughts on that challenge, because you know, I'm not saying that you have a 12 words or less solution answer ready, but it must be something that you guys face and have kind of struggled to face over the last while, because it's been so volatile from that whole capacity point of view.
So there are a couple of responses to that, and Owen will know I never do an answer in 12 words. A couple of points, Alan. What we are seeing, and I see this in every location I go into, the demand for hot desking is, there's a perception that there is a very high demand for hot desking. There isn't, unless you happen to be a centre or hub in a location that is a strong tourist destination during the summer months. So I can tell you that every single seat in Clare was booked out for the month of August last year. Similarly with Kerry and Southeast, Wexford, Waterford and Wicklow, etc. So that's what we're seeing. The demand for hot desking is really driven by that kind of, I suppose, seasonal activity. Connected Hubs launched a scheme last year, a voucher scheme, so that, and the ambition behind it was to promote remote working, hot desking. Vouchers worked really well for some locations, particularly those in the kind of areas I've just described. And for example, I was in a location the other day and they had used, I think one voucher was all they had to honour over the summer, because the demand just wasn't there. So I would say that there has been a huge amount of media hype around the demand for hot desking. The reality is badly understood by quite a number of boards right around the country. So, and this, I get this all the time. A little village in northeast Cork rings me up because we have a community hall and we want to fill it with hot desks and etc, etc, etc. And I'm going, it's not going to work. for a couple of reasons. You don't get that kind of demand in those locations, and it is not a viable commercial model. And that's the really important piece, I suppose, in the piece I'm getting to. You would want hundreds of thousands of square feet to have with more than 80% occupancy on an ongoing basis to have a commercially viable business model. Otherwise, your hot desking facility is carried by your other revenue streams, and that's what I see all around the country. Those locations that are offering it, again, a centre I was in during the week, they had a small office which had just been vacated. They had 2 different companies looking to go into that office, but the pressure from the board was convert this into a hot desking space because we need to be able to say we're offering it. But probably 48 weeks of the year that will not be occupied. So there's a real challenge when it comes to educating stakeholders around the actual demand and the commercial viability. And then the third piece around it is, I've been into multiple locations where they put in that hot desking facility, and bit by bit they're closing it up again for own door offices because that's what their clients want. So long answer. I don't know if it's gotten to the core of what you were asking me.
That's a great answer, and it's obviously something that you're concerned with on an ongoing basis. I mean, my own tuppence worth to that is that I was in, I had a look around, and I'm an occupant of a WeWork now for a couple of hours, a couple of days a week, but I have had a look at other places, and I know I would echo your experience that, the hot desking thing might seem okay, but I did have one very kind of frank off the record conversation with a facilities manager who just said basically, look, there's a brand on the door, which is a kind of a hot desking co-working space type brand, but underlying this is a very large real estate investment trust that owns the office block that is seeing this as a way to kind of offset the heating bills or the maintenance bills, but it isn't washing its face from a hot desking point of view. So, I think that's the commercial reality, is exactly what you've said. It's easier said than done. And if you're not getting in at the larger companies and providing a value added kind of enterprise level, maybe you're not at the races really in terms of these things. It's not the one entrepreneur logging in for a couple of hours to do some emails isn't really going to keep the lights on in any of these places, right?
Absolutely not. And what I do see is where you have an individual regularly using a hot desk facility. It's not actually about the facility at all, it's about the community around it. So I met a guy during the week using a hot desk over in the Galway Technology Centre. He comes from Sligo once a week, but it's not for the facility. He comes, even though it's a beautiful facility in Galway Technology Centre, he's coming for the community and the network. That's the reality of it.
Great. Owen, you had a question?
Yeah, and Siobhan's just gone there. It was to echo and build, if you like. When people think in Ireland of hubs, one of the things in the news recently is COVID and providing facilities locally for civil and public servants to work, and other instances of obvious known government policy. Okay, and so these things are true. These are services offered by hubs. But what CEAI is trying to do with QHubs is to get people, let's imagine the persona of the hubs manager, the poor, overworked, under-resourced hubs manager. Do we want that person to work on transactions? I must find a room for someone. I must have a desk for someone. Or do we expect them to be a good growth partner for an enterprise? And if you ask someone, reward someone to be one, you won't get the other. But we do want both in our national hub network. But the point of QHubs is to get the capabilities from national through CEAI and on to hub managers to support clients. And we've got a big educational coaching support role with hub managers so that they produce real growth plans, as opposed to they're worried they'll lose their resources if they get it all adventurous with their plans. So they don't make adventurous plans. They just work to make sure that they get the same resources next year as this year. I'm painting a broad picture on being very unfair to everybody, but sort of deliberate in this group so that you can see the point, or one of the points, of QHubs.
So one question I had though was the function of a hub to act as a lighthouse out into the wider community, not just those who are under the roof. And what can we do to, because like that, I know this program is aiming to sort of standardize, professionalize, and regularize and approach infrastructure personal, people, professions, etc. But there's a bit of an element of, oh gee, I don't know what happens in there. I've no idea. Is who runs that? I don't know. No, that wouldn't apply to me, right? So how can we get, and I say this about community hubs, I say this about the various centres that are attached to academia, all the various ones, they all have them. Nobody knows what they do, and there's a magic code to get in the door. But how could you embed that function, professionalization, and reach as a community one-stop shop for uplifting everybody? Like if you're going to run a professional innovation program, is that for the community or is that just for the people in the hub?
The underlying thinking way back when they started to fund these entities first was that it was actually as simple as build it and they will come. So the original cohort of community enterprise centres were built in locations where either a large employer had left very quickly. Galway Technology Centre is a great example of that. Western Digital upped and left, with several hundred people left unemployed in the city, and this was Enterprise Ireland's response to it. Now, you asked the question earlier, Catherine, I think it was something like, is the success measured by the hub or by the people who run the hub? You will find that if you've got the right person in the right role, working with the right board, and they've got the right kind of vision, then they will drive on the performance of that hub. And they never stop. And Galway Technology Centre are a fantastic example of that, as is the Guinness Enterprise Centre. But you could have a small hub down in West Cork. We've Brook Park down in Dunmanway, really small, accommodates maybe half a dozen businesses, if even that, a local meeting room. They're really successful as a landlord, but they're equally as successful when it comes to community engagement. And that's why, and I know when we started developing out the programme, I was adamant that collaborative relationships would be woven in there somewhere or another. I didn't even know there was an ISO standard around collaborative relationships, but there is, to my delight. So it's in there, and it's a really important piece that will contribute to the growth and the long-term sustainability of these centres and hubs. The ability to network, the ability to engage, the ability to talk to your local Leo office. I've talked to enterprise centres who don't know how to get in touch with their local Leo, and then there are enterprise centres and hubs who work in hand. So it's about that connectivity piece, and I suppose our role in it all is actually Gary O'Mara, who's our CEO. Gary's our chairperson. He's also CEO of Meath Enterprise. He described it very well in a conversation to somebody the other day. You've the dots and you've the dot connectors, and we're the dot connectors. The centres are the dots. So it's our, we pull them together. We make sure there's a sharing of information. We facilitate, type of budding up system. It's really about putting the right people together, and it can be something as simple as an introduction. Two hubs at opposite ends of the country that didn't know what the other were doing, and then all of a sudden they realize actually there's real potential here and we can work together. We did that, Charlie, with Enterprise Northern Ireland and the National Hub Network in England. We ran a cross-border pilot training program with 18 companies from the 3 jurisdictions on the program, and it was to promote that cross-border conversation, dialogue, build out supply chain, create soft landing space in enterprise centres and hubs and other locations, and it worked really, really well. So, as simple as having a conversation and building a collaborative discussion sounds, that's actually so much of what we're grounded in. And because we ourselves are a CLG, we have tiny resources. Much of what we achieve is built on collaborative relationships.
That's the stuff that hurts my head, right?
And I love it, Catherine. That's why you do what you do and I do what I do.
Because how can you make that repeatable? right? How can you make that sit and embed into a, now, sorry, I love connecting dots, but when it's still down to what number you have and whose mobile phone, you have multiple points of failure, right?
Yeah.
So how do you, and I don't say systemize it, but how do you make it repeatable, consistent, no matter who's in the chair? This is what it looks like. This is the playbook. This is the because then we have, it still involves people, and where there's people, stuff happens. We know that. But this is the this is what good looks like. And I know that's what you want to get there in the program, but how do you then bring it in the behaviors behind it?
Oh, that's a tough question.
That's what Catherine does, Siobhan.
I know, I didn't want to say that, Owen.
No, but you get my point.
I so totally get it, Catherine, because Sean McNulty, in his wisdom way back, convinced me to do the innovation management program. And it was a nightmare for my mindset because I just couldn't see how one size fits all. But I know all you folks love it, and I probably at some point will love it too and see the value in it, but I really struggled with it. We engage very, very actively with the members, the managers, and the personnel across the network. And part of that process, which I didn't mention at the beginning, but I'd made a note to mention it, was the type of co-creation approach we took to the development of this program. So right at the very, very start, we would have run a series of workshops that were facilitated by Owen and the team, where the managers were asked, what do they want? What don't they want, more importantly? And then it becomes about them seeing the very visual and visible results of that workshop engagement process, buying them into the testing process, and then they can see what good looks like. They see where the opportunities lie. And in an awful lot of situations, it can be about taking the fear away. So,
yeah. Can I say something?
Sorry, Paul had a question. His hand up first, Frank, and then you.
I'm trying to be a good citizen. No, I think it's very, just what you're talking about is very interesting. Just almost to the point of innovation and kind of the network and connections. I think what people are trying to do inside the organization from an innovation and innovation diffusion point of view, really you're trying to do the same thing from a hubs point of view. You're trying to do it on a countrywide level, which is a much bigger challenge. But I think a lot of the same principles apply. It's really about how the network works in terms of the communication and engagement. And actually the other thing is that I think the issue in terms of hubs kind of finding their sweet spot, as it were, that's really the same problem that organizations are trying to find now for function of the office. It's really, it's the same problem. What is the role of the office? It's kind of what is the role of the hub? And really they're two sides of the same coin, I think.
You answered that way better than I did, Paul. But you're absolutely right. There are two sides of the same coin. And sometimes, part of the process for us is waking up the thinking and the ambition. And we ran an event last year, and kind of in a way it was a little bit like, I won't quite say a poison chalice, but we got the funding, and then I thought, now what the hell am I going to do with this? How am I going to make this work? But the essence of it was around driving the message of social entrepreneurship in communities around Ireland. So we ran a series of community-driven social innovation hackathons. We built out an event around that, and we had some really, really nice success stories out of it. The regional hosts, the centres around the country who took on running this on our behalf, I'm sure they cursed me on a repeated basis all throughout last summer because of the amount of extra work is required, and because we built it as we went along. We were figuring it out, and I've no problem putting up my hand and saying that. We were figuring it out as we went along. And we're in the middle at the moment of writing a really nice impact report that highlights the opportunities for future initiatives like that, demonstrates what the challenges were, sets out some recommendations. just really, really good stuff, and really nice business case for future funding. But despite it all, at the very, very end, when we went back to the locations and said, okay, would you do this again? Absolutely. Because it introduced them to individuals in their communities that they would not necessarily have engaged with, purely because of the service offering within their own hub. So a very high-end location, Trinity Workspace. They got involved with this. They absolutely loved it. The students loved it. Will they do it again? They absolutely will. Then you've got a very, I suppose, much more traditional rural enterprise centre, Action Tune. They had incredible results. Really, really incredible, because of the mindset of the manager, who ended up with a group of direct provision women who had a business idea in the middle of Galway city centre, couldn't afford the bus fare to get from Galway city centre to Tune. So what did Sarah do? She brought the mentors to them. Amazing. That team of 3 women are now on a programme to set up their social enterprise. They've got sponsorship, they've got IT kit, they've got Leo support, really, really great experience. And that's the driver for Sarah to do this again next year, and probably others who look at Sarah and go, well, we should be doing this as well. So I suppose, and I get very maybe caught up in the story of the whole community engagement piece. But I think probably Owen's experience and Sean's and Eilish's over the last 2 years of working with this sector, it's very different to a commercially driven sector. And the individuals who are in these roles do it for much more than just, paying the bills of the enterprise centre at the end of the week. It's about making a difference. It's about impact. And that's the driver, that's the motivation.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Siobhan. Bill, you're next. Put your hand up.
Yeah, thanks very much. First of all, Siobhan, thanks very much for a very interesting presentation. And I'm finding the discussion and the questions that you're getting and the answers that you're making also very, very interesting. I'm also finding it a little bit scary for the reason that I'm currently the chairperson of Dungarvan Enterprise Centre.
Ah, yes. Oh. Now, if I had known that.
So, no, I don't know what you mean by that, though. Is that a good if you know
that, or a bad
if you know that?
I had no point of contact for there because Ashley had left quite a while back.
That's right. She has, yeah. So, okay, so you have a point of contact now then. And I'll ask about that in a second, right?
Next month.
Okay, but just very quickly, yeah, the points you were making about the hot desks is very interesting, because we revamped some of our centre during COVID with the assistance of Enterprise Ireland through the scheme that they had there in helping centres to stay alive. So we revamped some of our centre to be a co-working space, and we have an average, say, about maybe eight clients a week on average coming in, which is pretty good for Dungarvan. But you're right, though, that the peak season for us is during the summertime, because you have a lot of what you call seaside areas not too far from Dungarvan and so on. But also where we're we're not funded by anybody. We're self-sufficient, but we're kind of working very, very hard to stay afloat. So we're just about breaking even. And I think Catherine made a point that often is the case, that even though the Dungarvan Enterprise Centre has been around now for 12 years to this stage, there are still people in the town and the environment still saying, what's going on there, what's that about, or it's not from me, and so on. And that's one of the areas that we're struggling with, is we're struggling with that community engagement that you're talking about, because we're trying our best to do it, but it just doesn't seem to be clicking. We're advertising, we're doing social media stuff, we're doing lots of things like that, but the pipeline of people looking. Now, we do have 8 long-term tenants on site as well, that are using the office as a combination of micro enterprises and 1 or 2 SMEs, but our pipeline is almost zero. That there's nobody knocking the doors down to come in, no matter how much we're trying to get out there into the community to say what it is that we're doing. So we're trying to reinvent some of the stuff that we're doing as well to get better engagement, I suppose. But again, any help that we could get from people like yourself to do that would be absolutely delighted. Are you still looking for centres to take part in the what you call the diagnostic?
Oh, yes, absolutely, and we can swap emails maybe through Catherine afterwards, and I can talk to you about that separately.
Yeah.
If you wish. I'll tell you what we find, William. It's breaking down the obstacles that prevent individuals walking through the door, and very often that's something as simple as running an event for the community. We had a really simple example last year, so we're members of the Wheel and we've done some work with the Wheel, and we ran an event up in Bloom HQ last April, and some of the reps from the Wheel were there, and they just loved the idea of using a community enterprise centre rather than a hotel. So they were running more events, asked me for a couple of recommendations, and one of those I recommended was the one in Dunmanway because they wanted a West Cork location. The guys in Dunmanway had 60 organisations from the hinterland through their front door the day the Wheel hosted that event that had never set foot in the place before. And they were absolutely ecstatic about it. So I suppose it's that piece of how do you get them through the door? It's about figuring out what's of interest to them. And believe it or not, the other thing that really works well is get the local schools in, because they go home and tell their mommy and daddy. And then the third part, because I know this has gone out from Enterprise Ireland, is an instruction where EI regions and the regional offices are hosting events, is to start to use the enterprise centres rather than hotels.
Great idea.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, but I'd love to come down, William. I live in Cork, so very close by. So very happy to have a jaunt over the border to Waterford. Okay,
well, let's exchange emails then somehow, probably through Catherine or our own.
Fridays are for. This is what Fridays are for, making these connections. Cool. Excellent. Frank, you had a question for Siobhan.
Not so much a question, just to take a bit of pressure off, Siobhan. The networking that you asked about, Catherine. How do you get it replicated across all the networks? The key thing here is it's the responsibility of the companies to do that. I think you need to change the culture. One of the things I've noticed as an outsider, I've gone into hubs and asked the CEOs of the people who are using the hubs, how many of the other CEOs do you know? And in some hubs, it's zero. They go in and they go into their own office door and they go home. And I may have talked to 3 or 4 more CEOs and the people who are working there. So I think building a culture of it's not about you, it's about what you do for other people is kind of critical, and making people start looking outside their own network. The other thing that's kind of worth saying is, and maybe Siobhan can have a huge role in this, the number of times I've seen public sector support organizations describe what they do and not the outcomes of what they do is staggering. I was in a room on Wednesday listening to 2 people talking monotone about their programs, and the whole room had moved on to thinking about the holidays. Nobody was listening, and what they were saying, because I knew what they were doing was important, could be transformational for the clients. But the public sector needs to get much better at selling. Daniel Ping says, whatever your job title, 47% of your time is persuading people to do something different. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of communication skills. Anyway, keep it going, Siobhan. It's great. You're doing great work. Improving the quality of those hubs will be great.
Equally, Frank, though, our measurement criteria is jobs created as opposed to impact or value created.
Yeah, okay. Death by metric.
Death by the wrong metric is worse.
Yeah.
And that's the bit where it's a struggle, but it's also an opportunity.
Oh yeah,
it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, because if we could find some sort of consistent measurement of the financial, social, and national impact that all these things deliver, we'd have a whole different approach to them.
That program I mentioned earlier, and I'm not telling tales outside of school, this is a It's completely public information. So I'm in the middle of reporting on that at the moment, and I'm not asked to report on impact. I'm asked to report on financial spend.
Yeah.
And deal with departmental officials who struggle to manage anything other than that Excel form. And I know that sounds really bad. It's not meant to sound like that. And I think you know it's not meant to sound like that.
But that's how they get managed. That's how they get measured.
There's not a single question around what was the difference here? What happened? How many teams did you manage to put on the radar of the LEOs? You know, how many investors did you get in the room that day that are potentially interested? Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Bye, Frank. Anyway, that was just my little rant on the side. I forgot that this is being recorded, so you can edit that bit out, Catherine.
But Siobhan, the thing is, like in our engagement, right, with national government bodies, whatever we want to, whoever we're talking to, this is not just a financial. Yes, of course. At the end of the day, we need things to be sustainable in all manners of means. Economically sustainable is a very important measure, but it is not the only measure. So that's very much central in our conversations, because mindset. How can you measure a mindset?
Yeah.
But we know. Sorry, you know when you don't have it.
Oh, yes.
I think that's probably as close as we can get to it. Alan, sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, no, just on that, I mean, it's something that we have, Siobhan, as an Innovate Island, as a group, have had lots of conversations out, and members have all individually had conversations about measuring the impact of innovation. And, you know, it comes down to storytelling as much as metrics. It comes down to, you know, a lot of that sort of stuff. And like, it's not, that rant is not unfamiliar to us when you're asked to go in and change mindset, change culture, shift people's working practices. Yet, you know, people are staring at an Excel spreadsheet, sort of saying, well, next quarter, how's that going to look different to this quarter with all of the stuff? And payoffs are subtle and they're uncertain, and needs to be a lot of tolerance for failure or exploration that didn't lead you anywhere fruitful directly, but may have helped you indirectly in lots of other ways, you know. And that kind of cultural shift, I think, is something clearly that you guys are hitting up against as well. Is that what exactly is the value of this, aside from stuff on a balance sheet, aside from profit and loss and income, from, you know, revenue? Has to be kind of ways that we can all kind of think about how to tell those stories and how to articulate value that's not necessarily going to be in the same way or shape or format that other forms of value are measured. You know, it's not an unfamiliar challenge though, and you're in a fairly safe space, and you're not the first person to have articulated that as being kind of a blocker or a cultural frustration.
Yeah,
but my last question is, if you are going to be hard-hearted about it, will the hubs that get a QHub tick get more money?
That's the expectation in the longer term, Catherine, because the funders will use QHubs as a benchmark to see where the ambition lies. And the more ambitious a hub is, the greater chance there is of success, the higher the number of companies that come out of there, the greater the impact is in the community as well, but that's not talked about. But absolutely. And it goes back to this very, very significant hundreds of millions of investment that has gone into this sector, and still the very high level of unsustainability that exists.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, folks, it's coming up to time. Siobhan, thank you so much for your contributions today. If we wrecked your head, I think we've had a good day, because that's the whole purpose of these Friday chats, to stimulate conversation and connections. So yeah, Bill and Siobhan, I'll connect you afterwards. Thank you so much, folks, for your questions and your interaction today. Next up is, remind me, Charlie.
Coffee stop next week, and then the week after, a coffee stop with a theme yet to be determined.
Oh yes, and Bill, be warned.
Yeah.
You're on for a Friday chat. Now that you've let the cat out of the bag, we want to hear more about it.
Only after I make connections with Siobhan.
Absolutely, absolutely. But listen, thanks, folks. Have a lovely long weekend. Yes, Charlie, it's a holiday down here on Monday. We have a new one. None of us have had St. Bridget's Day off before, so we're all going to enjoy it. And have a very lovely weekend, folks. Siobhan, thanks very much for the start. Catherine. And we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.